Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about tariffs and the drastic effect they are having on companies and how some of them are spending thousands upon thousands of dollars in labor hours and research assistance in all these different various ways in order to save money on the back end simply for resourcing small parts or reclassifying small parts of their supply chain. So let's actually go into the first example provided here from our article from Business Insider. The headline reads, "How a tiny metal part showed a $100 million bag maker the high cost of obscure trade codes." And when I first heard that, I was like, oh, whoa, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, here is what's going on. Quote, "It wasn't even like we picked this particular material for aesthetic purposes or anything like that. It's just what we happened to sample out and were using. Quote, before Trump's tariff hike, most goods fell between a 0 and 7% tariff rate, keeping the U.S. average at about 1.4. But Scott Marbury, a Washington-based trade lawyer at Shepherd Mullen, now with a 10% base tariff layered on top of the country and product-specific duties, the average rate has surged to closer to 18%. I know we hopped right into the article today. Normally we do our big daily debate. So we're going to do our daily debate right now. Does that sound rational? Does that sound okay? Does that sound good to you that every single employer in the United States has to worry about at least 11% if we're going to go with the average from the high end of the spectrum, or if we go from the average base compared to the initial average, so 1.4 to 18%, you're looking at a 16.6% increase. Hello, does that sound okay? Do you think that people are going to be able to sustain the amount of jobs that they have in all these different companies because of these extra costs? Come on. Is that okay? Maybe I'm a little biased. Maybe I slanted that question a little bit. Throw your opinion down there in the comment section. I want to hear what everybody has to say because maybe I'm just crazy. But here's another extent that some of these companies are going to in order to make sure that they're saving money. Quote, somebody would say, let's just change the composition of our material so that it has more wool in it, so that we can easily classify it with this HTS code as opposed to the previous one we were using. And now we're saving 4.2% on every beanie we sell. And the math works out like this. Let me read it to you. Quote, said one client shifted a beanie's material blend from 50% wool to just over 50%, moving it into a different tariff category. Are you kidding me? This sort of gamesmanship just to get put into a different category? I understand that businesses are meant to do these sort of things. They're meant to care about the bottom line. They're meant to play within the bounds that the government creates. But this is idiotic. It is so arbitrary in nature that this small shift of 1%, just over 50% wool, can completely change this code. Now, you may be thinking, okay, what does HTS actually stand for? Quote, it is the Harmonized Tariff Schedule, and it is an entire list of 20,000 different inventory items or product codes that the government assesses on. And if you're in one rather than the other, it can cost you a larger percentage in tariffs. Quote, on Walmart's May earnings call, CEO Doug McMillan said suppliers were shifting materials from tariff-impacted compliance, like aluminum, to fiberglass, where there is no tariff. Quote, our merchants scoring teams and suppliers are being creative, McMillan said, and that's, of course, what they should do. We encourage all the small businesses to take advantage of what they can, the big businesses too, to take advantage of what they can so they don't have to move all those extra costs onto us. But the tariffs, as they were intended by the Navarros and the Trumps of the world and the people who really believe in these tariff mechanisms, are meant to shift consumption away from certain products. But if you're doing it in a way that is ham-handed, ham-fisted, I believe would be the correct way to explain it here. And it all comes down to classification codes, and changing the amount of the alloy in there by 1% would be enough. If you're trying to stop Chinese steel or Chinese stainless steel, you don't say, oh, hey, if a product has 51% Chinese stainless steel in it, it's bad. But if it has 49, at that point, you would make the percentages even larger. This is absolutely idiotic and ham-fisted, and it is just causing these companies to incur larger costs to change small things that make a huge difference on the HTS, but in the final product they don't change that much. It's as if you're putting up a high cost and trying to say you're doing a lot, when in reality you're causing small shifts that you can still take to the people. You can still take it to all these different agencies and say, hey, look at all these big changes that we've made. We've actually lowered our amount of stainless steel by 2% across the entire economy, which is not true whatsoever. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but imagine everybody does shave off that 1% or that 2% in order to make them all compliant. That is a big ripple effect down the chain. But at the end of the day, if you want to stop it, you don't do it in this ham-fisted way. I don't even think you should be doing it in the first place. But if you were to do it, this is not the way to do it. Quote, now companies are saying we need to classify everything in our inventory right away and to make sure everything is correct, he said. At Fictive, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, Licita said customers are increasingly demanding visibility on how classification and tariffs affect their cost. And this is something that I thought was really interesting. One, it's actually fascinating that a lot of these companies were not properly complying with the HTS before. They weren't being super stringent about it. If there is one thing that comes out of this policy, which is a more particular combing of these different materials and understanding where our supply chains are located and how the ripple effects from different policies and or global effects are going to hit us, I think that's fair enough that these companies have been misclassifying. They haven't been prosecuted for it because it's not been a big deal. And the Trump team said they're going to actually take a look at this. If you're going to have these policies in place to do it right, don't do it half. I don't want to say the rest of that phrase, but don't do it in a half manner. This is the best way to say it cleanly and nicely for YouTube. But overall, the other thing that I like from that quote is that they are demanding visibility. It's much like Amazon when they had that tariff cost baked into their website. This is a little bit of political engineering, no doubt about that. But if these companies don't like these policies because it's going to end up hurting them and they have to pass those costs on to the consumer, you don't want to lose your customers. You don't want to have your customers say, oh, we don't want to go back there because the prices are getting so high. At least if you're going to have to do that, you want to advertise why they are, especially if it's outside your control and it's not a choice you made and you're forced to do it. I think it's an absolutely brilliant move. More people should do this. They should actually list out the taxes that their state and their government are forcing them to pay whenever you have a product. And then maybe people will actually be more consciously thinking about how much the government steals from them besides the fact that it's listed out on your paycheck. And most people just have direct deposit nowadays. They don't look at their pay stubs as much as you probably should to understand where all this extra money is coming from. If you look at that paycheck, you intently look at that paycheck and you don't actually just get direct deposits, yeah, I think you'll have a different perspective on what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed and where your money ends up going. But hey, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a person who looks at my paychecks and just cringes every single time while other people are fine with paying for other people's healthcare. Whatever. Quote, the company generated $100 million in revenue last year and aimed for $170 million in 2025. But Tariffs, this is talking about the bag maker, by the way, the first one that we opened with. Quote, but tariffs and supply chain distributions have put the target out of reach, said Vesarella, the CEO. Despite the strain, Vesarella has resisted passing costs on. Her original bag model cost $90. And that is what the passionate, strong CEO, the one who will spend those man hours that they're already paying for to reclassify all of their different goods, make sure they fall in alignment with the HTS, make sure that she's not passing any sort of costs on to her consumer. That is the passionate person. That is the person who probably has a little bit larger margins than some other people. Not saying that her product's not worth those margins. I'm not saying that she's trying to profiteer, but she probably has some thicker margins. I've seen her products. It probably doesn't cost that much to produce. I would say under $5 per bag, and then shipping costs are probably $10 per bag. At scale, it's probably a little bit less than that. And then the man hours for designing and marketing and all that, let's assume for each bag, when you disperse it across the entire inventory, that it's $30. Okay, so overall, that's $45. It's a pretty generous margin on the bag. And then let's be clear, I don't have that information myself, but that's my rough guess, if not cheaper than that, honestly. So she can eat those margins a little bit. And that's fair enough. But mom and pop shops can't. The small startup businesses cannot do that. They're sourcing materials. They may not even know the full composition. They may get bitten in the butt by these tariffs. Big guys can spend the hours for the lawyers, can spend the hours of their time because they already pay a whole bunch of people. They can take 2 people off a project and spend the money, or at least the time that they are willing to give up in order to do these reclassifications, to really do these deep dives. Not everybody can, okay? And I understand we're in a free market. If you can't do it, then hire somebody that can get it off the ground. I'm not disagreeing with that. But when you're hamstringing the free market with these sort of heavy-handed tariffs, it just frustrates me to no end, especially when you're possibly restricting the growth of small businesses, startup shops, not just software companies, physical manufacturers, or at least product manufacturers and sellers. So with that, I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to get too angry. If you want to read this entire article, I took excerpts from all over the place. They was not necessarily in order. So if you want to read the entire thing, the link will be in the description below, that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post the links to these episodes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as well as the link to 6 and 6, which is our international news segment that comes out on Tuesday and Thursday. It's 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. And you know what I realized? I also didn't say Happy Labor Day, since this is indeed going out on Labor Day. So, hope everybody had a great summer, and I hope school goes well for everybody that's listening that age. And if you have kids that are going back to school, lucky you. Maybe you get a little bit of spare time, or maybe the schedule gets a little bit more crazy. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.